The email pinged on my phone as I stared at my son, who was laughing at my outdated career choices. At 50, I was used to being underestimated, but nothing prepared me for the cold jolt of the email from HR. We regret to inform you, the company I helped build. They just fired me on my son's graduation day. Funny how life works, huh? Ever had a moment that made you question everything? Share your thoughts. Elliot Porter sat frozen in his office chair as the phone rang. The number on the screen was from the company, and deep down, he knew it wasn't going to be good news. He'd been in this game long enough to sense when things weren't going well. The voice on the other end was unmistakable: Julia, the CEO. Her tone was as cold and impersonal as ever. Elliot, I'm afraid we won't be renewing your contract. You're being let go as of today, she said, her words cutting through the silence of the room. No explanation, no softening the blow. Just business. The call ended abruptly, leaving Elliot staring at the phone in his hand, unable to comprehend what had just happened. He had spent the last 20 years of his life building his career here, only to have it all come crashing down in a matter of seconds. The very foundation of his professional identity seemed to vanish in the blink of an eye. For a moment, Elliot couldn't breathe. His mind raced, trying to grasp the magnitude of the situation. Was this real? Was he really fired after everything he'd done for this hotel chain? He leaned back in his chair, staring at the sterile, familiar walls of his office, a place where he had poured countless hours into financial reports, meetings, and long nights of work. And now all of it seemed to hold no value. He hung up the phone and gazed out of the window, watching the bustling streets of Minneapolis below. The city seemed so indifferent, as if it were going on with its business, oblivious to the turmoil he was facing. It was fall, and the air outside was crisp, the golden leaves fluttering down from the trees, mirroring the way everything in his life felt like it was falling apart. The phone call was unexpected, but in hindsight, not entirely surprising. The signs had been there for months. He recalled the last meeting with Julia, a chilly encounter where her dissatisfaction with his financial management was evident. She'd asked him pointedly about the budget cuts and how he'd handled the numbers. He had tried to defend his choices, but she wasn't having any of it. It was clear now that the seeds of this moment had been planted long before. As he sat there, a sense of failure and betrayal washed over him. The trust he had placed in the company and Julia, all seemed to have been in vain. He had worked tirelessly trying to keep the hotel's finances afloat during tough times. And yet here he was, cast aside without so much as a thank you. His mind couldn't help but loop back to that final conversation with Julia, her eyes cold and distant, as if he were nothing more than a tool to be discarded once he no longer served its purpose. Elliot stood up and began pacing around his office, the weight of the moment sinking in. How had things gone so wrong? He thought about the long hours, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices he'd made for this job, and how they all seemed meaningless now. In a way, he had been so absorbed in the work that he hadn't noticed how things had been slipping away. The company had been shifting priorities, and he had been too focused on his own role to see the bigger picture. He walked over to his desk, feeling the weight of the reports in front of him. The stacks of paper that once symbolized his dedication now felt like a reminder of everything he had failed to do. A part of him wanted to slam them down in frustration, but he simply stared at them, unable to make sense of it all. As he reached for his coffee cup, his phone buzzed again. It was an email, one he wasn't expecting. It was from Rick, a colleague who had worked with him on a few projects over the years. Rick had always been a quiet support, the kind of person who wasn't afraid to speak the truth when it mattered. Elliot opened the message, his heart sinking as he read Elliot. I don't know if you've heard yet, but things are changing at the company. There are some major shifts in strategy, and I think you're being caught in the middle of it. Be careful, there are people behind this decision, and it might not be as simple as it seems. Elliot felt a chill run down his spine as he finished reading the message. This wasn't just about a bad year or a simple financial misstep. Someone had made a decision, and he was the one left to pick up the pieces. He stared at the screen, unsure of what to do next. Who was behind this? Was Julia just the messenger, or was she complicit in this decision? He needed answers, but for now, all he had was uncertainty. Elliot sank back into his chair, the weight of everything pressing down on him. He had to figure out what had gone wrong, who was responsible, and how to move forward. But for now, all he could do was sit there in disbelief, trying to make sense of a world that no longer made sense. The quiet hum of his office was the only sound that filled the room as Elliot Porter sat at his desk, scanning the company emails on his laptop. The fire in his chest had not yet died down from the shock of the previous day's call. If anything, it had grown hotter, more determined. He was going to find out why he was fired. He wasn't going to let this go unanswered. Elliot's fingers hovered over the keyboard as he recalled the meetings, the countless hours spent in the company's finance department, poring over budgets, spreadsheets, and projections. He knew his work inside and out. His numbers had always been solid, his reports meticulous. Yet something about yesterday's call, something about Julia's tone had unsettled him. It wasn't just the abruptness of the decision, it was the feeling of being discarded without a second thought, like he had never mattered in the first place. There was more to it than just a simple firing. There had to be. His mind started to piece together fragments of the last few months. There were signs he had missed, things he had brushed off as minor inconveniences or misunderstandings. The first one that came to mind was the email he had sent to Julia a month ago, an important one discussing budget discrepancies and the company's failure to meet its financial goals. He had never received a reply. That was odd. Julia always responded quickly to emails, especially ones that dealt with money. Elliot leaned forward in his chair, the cool glow of the computer screen illuminating his face. He opened his email archive and started scrolling back. There it was, the email, sent on September 15th. He clicked on it, hoping to find some clue, some response. But there was nothing. The thread was empty. It was as if it had vanished. His stomach turned. Was it possible that Julia had intentionally ignored it? Or worse, had someone deleted it? Elliot's hand tightened around the mouse, his eyes narrowing. If he was going to find out what happened, he needed to dig deeper. He needed evidence. Elliot made up his mind. He would start looking through the company's financial records and see what he could find. There had to be something in the accounts, something that didn't add up. Maybe a discrepancy, maybe a lie. The next few hours passed in a blur as Elliot sifted through old financial documents and meeting notes. His eyes scanned each page carefully, looking for anything that seemed out of place. But it was tedious work, and after a while his mind started to wander. The weight of the task was starting to sink in. This wasn't just about losing a job anymore. This was about uncovering the truth. Just as he was about to give up for the night, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Rachel Winters, an old mentor from his early days in the industry. She had always been a steady influence in his life, someone who had helped him navigate the corporate world's rough waters. Rachel had a no-nonsense attitude, and she didn't mince words. "I heard about the firing, Elliot. I know you're upset, but don't act rashly. If you want to get to the bottom of this, you need to be smart about it. Don't make any moves without a solid plan." Elliot sighed. He knew she was right, but it was hard to be patient when all he could feel was the fire burning inside him. Still, Rachel's advice had always been sound. He had to take a step back. He couldn't risk making a mistake now. What should I do first? He typed back, his fingers slow as he waited for her response. Start with the company's financial statements. Look for discrepancies. But don't just focus on the obvious. Look for patterns. Also, if you find anything suspicious, don't act on it just yet. You need to gather more evidence. Elliot read the message carefully. It was clear Rachel wanted him to approach this methodically. So he did just that. He opened up the latest set of financial statements and began scanning them once again. This time, he focused not just on the numbers, but on the details, the small things that others might overlook. As he was about to move on to another document, something caught his eye. A line in the report seemed to have been altered just slightly. At first glance, it appeared as though it was nothing more than a typographical error, but Elliot's gut told him it was something more. He pulled up an older version of the same report from 6 months ago. The line had been the same, but now it was different. A small but significant change. His heart began to race. This was it. This was the crack he had been waiting for. He quickly made a note to investigate further, but his curiosity was getting the best of him. He needed to keep going. Elliot dug deeper into the archives, hunting for more discrepancies, more signs that things were not as they seemed. He found more, Some of the budget allocations had been adjusted without explanation, and certain projects had been marked as completed, when in reality, they hadn't even begun. He was onto something, but he needed more. He needed access to the emails between the higher-ups, the ones that might reveal the true reason behind his firing. And then, as if by fate, he found it. An email that had been deleted. It was a direct message from Julia sent the day before his firing. Elliot's breath caught in his throat as he saw the subject line, Financial Management. It was short, blunt. Let's discuss this in person tomorrow. It's urgent. Elliot felt a sense of dread wash over him. Why had this been deleted? What was so important that it had to be erased? He leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair. He had found something, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. His phone buzzed again. It was another message from Rachel. Don't do anything yet, Elliot. Keep collecting information. You'll need it all before you can make your next move. Elliot nodded to himself, even though she couldn't see him. He had to keep going. He had to find out what was really happening. And now it seemed like he was closer than ever to uncovering the truth. Elliot sat across from Rachel Winters, his mentor, in her small office. The scent of coffee lingered as she leaned back in her chair. Let me tell you something, Elliot, she began. A few years ago, I was in your shoes. I got blindsided by a lawsuit that nearly destroyed everything. Elliot, still processing everything that had happened, listened closely. A lawsuit? What happened? Rachel sighed, her eyes darkening. We had a client who sued us for misrepresentation of financial data. It looked like it was going to ruin the firm, but I didn't panic. I found an email that proved our innocence and we won the case. Elliot nodded slowly. He had been consumed by anger and confusion, but now Rachel's words struck him with a sense of clarity. So what do I do now? He asked. You stay calm, Rachel replied firmly. You gather evidence, be patient, and when the time comes, you fight smart. Rachel then suggested Elliot hire a lawyer. It's not about rushing in, it's about being strategic. Elliot, still processing the gravity of her advice, made the decision he would hire a lawyer. I'll do it, he said. Rachel smiled. Good. Now get everything, emails, documents, anything that could help. As Elliot delved into his investigation, he began to uncover discrepancies in the financial records that he hadn't noticed before. It seemed like the company was hiding something. Then a call from Rachel led him to Thomas Hale, a corporate lawyer. At their meeting, Thomas wasted no time. Elliot, you've been targeted, he said. Start gathering everything you can. This is bigger than you think. Elliot's heart skipped a beat. If he had been watched all along, then everything had been orchestrated by someone else. His fight was no longer just for his job, it was for his future. With newfound resolve, Elliot left the office determined to get to the bottom of the conspiracy, even if it meant fighting a battle much bigger than he had anticipated. Elliot sat at the head of the dinner table, the warm golden glow of the chandelier above, casting long shadows over the room. The table was set as it always was on Sunday nights. The place settings neat and organized, the silverware polished to a perfect gleam. But tonight something felt off. His mother's eyes, usually full of warmth, now carried a weight of concern, and Julia's silence spoke volumes. You've been awfully quiet, Elliot, his mother remarked, cutting into her roast beef with a deliberate slowness. What's going on at work? You've been acting strange for weeks now. Elliot sighed, setting down his fork. Feeling the tension build in his chest, the weight of the day's events still sat heavily on him, the emails, the documents, the lawyer. He had spent hours poring over them, but now at this dinner table it felt as though he were carrying the weight of his failure on his shoulders. It's complicated. He began, his voice low. The company is in trouble. They're restructuring and I've been let go. It's a lot to deal with right now. A silence fell over the table. His mother's eyes widened, and for a moment, Elliot could see the worry in her gaze. You've been let go, she repeated, her voice filled with disbelief. After all these years, what happened? I don't know yet, Elliot said, trying to keep his composure. I'm investigating it. I think there's more to it than just a simple decision. I need to figure out what's really going on. Julia, who had been quietly sipping her wine, finally spoke. Her tone was sharp, laced with a bitterness Elliot hadn't expected. "You should have figured this out before it became an issue," she said, her words like a cold slap. "We don't have time for mistakes, Elliot. You can't keep going like this." Elliot flinched, the sting of her words cutting deeper than he wanted to admit. He had spent years building a life with Julia, and yet in this moment he felt like a failure in her eyes. He tried to keep his voice steady. "I'm doing everything I can, Julia. I'm not giving up on this." But Julia's face remained unchanged, her expression unreadable. His mother, on the other hand, seemed more agitated now. She pushed her plate away, her fork clattering noisily against it. "I knew something was off when you started coming home late every night, Elliot. This is what happens when you let things slide. You've got a family to think about now. We can't afford this kind of instability." Elliot's heart sank. He had always thought his mother would understand, that she would be the one to offer comfort. But instead she was treating him like a child who had made a simple mistake. He could feel the walls closing in around him, the weight of their judgment pressing harder with every word. "You can't expect everything to just magically fix itself," Julia continued, her voice soft but cutting. "You've been acting like everything's fine, but it's not, and now look where we are." He wanted to scream, to tell them how unfair this all felt, how much harder the situation had become because of their lack of support. But he couldn't. He was trapped between their expectations and the truth he was uncovering. This wasn't just about the company, it was about everything he had built with them, everything they had built with him, slowly slipping through his fingers. "I'm doing everything I can." He repeated the words, feeling hollow even as they left his lips. "I'm going to fix this. I will figure out what happened, and I won't let it destroy us." The silence in the room deepened, suffocating him as he looked between his mother and Julia. The space between them felt impossible to bridge. His mother's disappointment was evident, and Julia's coldness seemed like a wall he couldn't break through. He had hoped for understanding, for solidarity, but instead he was met with suspicion and blame. Finally, his mother sighed, shaking her head. "I just don't understand you anymore, Elliot," she muttered. "You're too proud to ask for help, too proud to admit when you've made a mistake. You're going to drive this family into the ground." That was the last straw. Elliot felt his frustration build to a boiling point. He stood up suddenly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I'm not going to let this destroy me," he snapped. "I'm not going to let it destroy any of us. I've got to do this on my own, and I will. If you don't believe in me, fine. But I'm not asking for your approval anymore." He turned to leave, but Julia's voice stopped him. "You're making a mistake, Elliot," she called after him, her tone laced with frustration. But Elliot didn't stop. He didn't turn around. He walked out of the room, the door slamming behind him. As he stood in the hallway, his heart pounding in his chest, a sense of clarity washed over him. He wasn't going to rely on them. He wasn't going to wait for their approval or support. This was his battle, and he was going to fight it alone. His decision was made. He was going to take matters into his own hands, starting with the company and the evidence he had been gathering. No more waiting, no more second-guessing. The time to act was now. And with that, Elliot knew he was ready for whatever came next. He wasn't going to back down, not for anyone. Elliot sat at his desk, the late afternoon sunlight spilling through the window, casting long shadows over the room. The usual hum of the office had faded, leaving only the occasional clink of his coffee cup. But today his mind was far from the steady routine of numbers and spreadsheets that had once dominated his life. Today everything had changed. The email from Rachel was still fresh in his inbox, her advice echoing in his mind. "You have the evidence now, Elliot. You need to act." She had been right, of course. For months, Elliot had been collecting the pieces, each document, each email like a breadcrumb on a trail that led to something far darker than he had anticipated. The decision to fire him had never felt right, not from the beginning. But it wasn't until he dug deeper that he realized it wasn't about performance or cost-cutting measures at all. No, it was something much more insidious, something he could feel in his bones now, like a dark cloud hanging over everything he had worked for. As he sifted through the financial documents one more time, the pattern became clear. The discrepancies, the manipulated reports, the hidden debts, all of it pointed to one undeniable conclusion. The company hadn't just fired him, they had set him up. They had created a scapegoat, a fall guy for their own financial failures. And Elliot, naive as he had been too focused on the numbers to see it coming. His hand shook as he reached for his phone. It was time to make the call. He dialed Rachel's number, feeling a sense of urgency settle over him. She picked up on the second ring. "Elliot?" Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "Have you found what you were looking for?" "I have." Elliot said, his voice steady, despite the whirlwind of thoughts racing through his mind. "This wasn't just a decision to fire me. They've been covering something up, Rachel. They've been hiding the real reasons behind their financial failures, and they've been using me as a pawn." There was a brief pause on the other end, then Rachel spoke, her tone sharp. "What do you plan to do with that information?" "I'm going public," Elliot replied without hesitation. "I'm going to expose them, bring everything into the light. It's the only way to make sure this doesn't happen to someone else." "You need to be careful, Elliot," Rachel warned. "You're playing with fire. Once it's out there, you won't be able to take it back. There's no turning back from this." "I know," Elliot said, his jaw tightening. "But I've already lost everything. If I don't do this, they win." Rachel's sigh on the other end of the phone was heavy with concern, but also a touch of admiration. "All right," she said after a beat. "I'll help you prepare. But remember, this isn't just about you anymore. It's about everything you stand for." Elliot ended the call and sat there for a moment, staring at the documents spread across his desk. This was it. There was no more waiting, no more uncertainty. The truth was out there, and it was time to let the world see it. He clicked open his email, the cursor hovering over the attachment. It was time to send the evidence to the press. He had already contacted a journalist who had been following the company's financial troubles for weeks. This was the break they needed. This was his chance to expose the truth. With a final breath, Elliot clicked send. The following days were a blur. As the story hit the media, the fallout was immediate and intense. News outlets ran the story, and the company issued a statement condemning the allegations, calling them baseless and misguided. But Elliot knew better. He had the proof, the documents, the emails. He had nothing left to fear. But then, just as he thought he might finally catch his breath, the phone rang. "Elliot Porter," the voice on the other end was gruff, unrecognizable. "You've made a big mistake." Elliot's heart skipped a beat. "Who is this?" The voice chuckled darkly. "That's not important. What's important is that you've crossed a line. You've exposed something that was never meant to see the light of day. And now you'll face the consequences." Elliot's blood ran cold. "What do you want?" "Nothing from you," the voice said. "But you'd better hope this doesn't come back to bite you, Porter. We don't forget." The line went dead. Elliot sat there, his hand still gripping the phone. His mind raced, but for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel afraid. He felt something else, a burning resolve, a sense of justice that pushed him forward. The company might have their people, their power, but he had the truth on his side. And that was something they couldn't take away from him. He wasn't going to stop. Not now, not ever. As he stood up from his desk, Elliot's gaze fell on the stack of papers in front of him. The battle was far from over, but he knew one thing for certain. He had taken the first step toward justice, and there was no turning back. Elliot sat at his desk, the lawsuit from his former company staring back at him. It wasn't just about being fired anymore. It was about the larger conspiracy he had uncovered. The company had tried to bury him, but Elliot wasn't backing down. His phone buzzed Rachel. "Elliot, the shareholders are on your side," she said, excitement in her voice. For the first time, Elliot felt hope. A group of disgruntled shareholders, also victimized by the company's mismanagement, had reached out to him. Together, they could expose the truth. At the shareholders' meeting, Elliot felt a sense of unity. They were in this together now. "We'll stand by you," one of the investors said. "Let's make sure they pay for what they've done." Days passed in a blur of planning and gathering evidence. With the shareholders' support, Elliot felt stronger than ever. But the company wasn't giving up. They were retaliating with threats. Elliot received a chilling call. "You've crossed the line, and you'll pay the price." He knew they were trying to intimidate him, but he wasn't scared. "The truth is out. You can't stop it." As the legal battle escalated, Elliot knew the stakes were higher than ever. The company was desperate, but he had the truth on his side. And with the shareholders behind him, he wasn't going to stop until justice was served. Elliot stood by the window, the crisp autumn air brushing against his face as he stared out over the city. Minneapolis had returned to its quiet rhythm after the chaos of the legal battle, but nothing felt the same. The weight of the victory was still there, but it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like something had been lost along the way. His phone buzzed with a message. It was from his mother. "How could you not tell us what was happening? Why didn't you reach out sooner?" The message was cold, full of blame. He hadn't spoken to her in weeks ever since the trial had ended. She had been distant during it all, and now that the dust had settled, she was demanding explanations. Elliot let out a sigh and set the phone down. He had known this moment would come. His family had never truly understood the gravity of what had been at stake. They had lived their lives with the assumption that everything would always be fine, but they hadn't seen the cracks. And now that the truth was out, they didn't know how to handle it. As he sat back down at his desk, Rachel's name flashed across the screen. He answered quickly. "How's it going?" she asked, her voice soothing as always. "I'm fine," Elliot replied, though he didn't feel it. "It's just, everything's different now. The victory, it's not enough. I thought things would go back to normal, but they haven't. I don't know if they ever will." Rachel's silence spoke volumes. She had been through something similar before, and she understood. "You've done the right thing, Elliot, but it doesn't mean everything will fix itself. It takes time, and sometimes things change in ways we don't expect." Elliot rubbed his face, feeling the exhaustion settle deeper into his bones. "I thought I'd feel relief. I thought it would all make sense again, but all I feel is disconnected from everything, from the people I used to trust, from my own family." Rachel paused before speaking again. "You can't control how others react, but what you can control is how you move forward. Don't let this victory define you. Let it be the beginning of something better." The conversation left him with a heavy heart, but it also gave him something to hold on to. Rachel was right. This was just the beginning. The next few days passed in a blur of emails and calls from family. His father called asking him to explain everything in detail. His sister sent a message of support, though it felt more like an obligation than a genuine connection. They all wanted to know the aftermath of the battle, but no one asked how he was doing. No one seemed to realize that the victory wasn't enough to patch the rift that had formed between them all. Elliot realized that the aftermath wasn't just about the company or the legal case. It was about rebuilding relationships that had been shattered by his decisions and by the truth he had uncovered. He wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. He was fighting for a place in the world he once knew. The phone rang again, and this time it was Julia, his wife. Her voice was hesitant when she spoke. "I heard about everything that happened," she said softly. "Are you okay?" Elliot swallowed hard. He didn't know if he was okay. "I don't know, Julia. I really don't." There was a long pause, and he could feel the distance between them growing. She had never understood his decisions, and now after everything that had happened, he wasn't sure if she ever would. "I need to think," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. As the phone clicked off, Elliot knew that he had reached a crossroads. The legal battle was over, but the real fight had just begun. His relationship with his family, his marriage, none of it was the same anymore. And now he had to figure out where to go from here. He wasn't sure if he could go back to the way things were, but maybe that was okay. Maybe it was time to build something new, even if it meant letting go of the past. The weight of that realization settled heavily on his chest as he sat back staring at the screen of his phone. There was no easy way forward. The fight for justice had cost him more than he had expected, but it had also opened his eyes to a new truth. Some battles, no matter how hard we fight, don't end with the kind of victory we expect. And now Elliot had to decide if he was willing to accept the change, if he could live with the consequences of his decisions and find a way to move forward, even if it meant doing so alone. The sun was setting over Minneapolis, casting a golden hue over the city, as Elliot stood by the large windows of the event hall. The charity gala was in full swing, and the chatter of excited guests filled the air. But Elliot's attention wasn't on the glamour around him. He was focused on the stage, where a small group of young entrepreneurs from the hospitality industry were about to present their projects. This event marked the culmination of a journey he had started months ago, a journey fueled by a single unshakable belief that his struggles and his victories could be the key to helping others. Elliot had made a decision long ago. He wouldn't let his victory be just about himself. The fight for justice had cost him his family's trust, and it had cost him much more than he could have anticipated. But as he watched the young entrepreneurs step up one by one, presenting their ideas with fire in their eyes, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: purpose. The past year had been a whirlwind. The legal battle had drained him, and the aftermath had left its mark on every part of his life. His family, his friends, and even his sense of self, all had been stretched thin by the pressure of it all. But in the wake of those struggles, something remarkable had happened. He had found a new calling, a calling to help others avoid the same mistakes he had made. Months of planning and tireless work had led him here. The Community Hospitality Fund, a nonprofit dedicated to helping young entrepreneurs in the hospitality industry, was now a reality. It wasn't just a way for him to give back. It was a chance to create a network of support for those who, like him, had struggled in an industry where competition and financial pressure often crushed dreams. "How does it feel?" Rachel asked, stepping up beside him. She had been with him every step of the way, her advice and guidance crucial in shaping this new chapter in his life. The weight of her words was as heavy as it was comforting. Elliot smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "It feels right. Like maybe all the pain was worth it. Maybe this is what I was supposed to do all along." Rachel nodded, her gaze sweeping over the room where the young entrepreneurs mingled with potential investors and industry experts. "You're giving them a chance that you didn't have," she said softly. "That's something worth fighting for." The evening went on with speeches, awards, and discussions about the future of the hospitality industry. Elliot could hear the excitement in the voices around him, the hope in their words. He had built something important, something that had the potential to change lives. As the event wrapped up, Elliot stood in front of the large display, showing the faces of the first round of recipients for the fund. They were all young men and women eager to bring fresh ideas to the industry. It was hard to believe that just a year ago, he had been at the center of a legal storm, fighting to prove his worth. Now he was standing at the forefront of something far more meaningful. "Thanks to all of you," Elliot said, addressing the room as he took the microphone. "This fund isn't just about me, it's about the people who are coming up behind us. People who have the passion and the drive, but who need the opportunity to make a difference. Together we can build something that lasts." There was a ripple of applause as he finished speaking, and for the first time in a long while, Elliot felt a surge of hope. The future, once so uncertain, now seemed full of potential. He glanced at the investors gathered at the back of the room, their interest piqued. The fund was starting to gain momentum, and with that, a new chapter was unfolding, not just for Elliot, but for an entire generation of young entrepreneurs. As the night came to a close, Elliot stood quietly on the balcony, staring out at the city. He had come a long way from the man who had been fired, who had been betrayed, who had lost everything. The journey hadn't been easy, and the road ahead was still filled with challenges. But for the first time in a long while, he could see the horizon clearly. Elliot had rebuilt more than just his career. He had built something that could change the world for others. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, he was ready to face it with a sense of purpose and hope. And as he watched the sun dip below the skyline, he knew one thing for sure: this was only the beginning. As Elliot stood in the warm glow of the evening sun, he couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. The same city that had once seemed so unforgiving now felt like a place of rebirth, much like the quiet yet powerful transformation in his own heart. The cracks in his life, like the ones in his career, had been mended, and in their place something stronger had taken root. The truth is, sometimes it takes losing everything to realize what truly matters. The journey from being broken to being rebuilt isn't easy, but it's often the only way to discover our resilience. Elliot learned that redemption isn't always about fixing what's lost, but about building something better for those who come after. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise, share your thoughts, or maybe even your own story of rebirth. It's never too late to find your new beginning.